here tonight. As most of you are aware, this year we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Metropolitan Government. We had the opening celebration on City Hall. Mayor Dean presided that day, and there was a stunning turnout in the blistering hot weather, reflecting our commitment to recognition of what the city has been about, how it has been envied and copied and replicated, and all of us who've been here for a while, and some who've come from afar, come to understand just what a gift we were given 50 years ago. And it is, I think, to the great credit of a visionary mayor, Carl Dean, that we would celebrate this 50th anniversary in a whole series of events. That opening session on the plaza in front of City Hall was the first. And then there are regular monthly meetings like this one tonight here. Most of you were here that night a couple of months ago now, when we reviewed the how the idea was conceptualized and developed, knocked down, defeated, then brought up again by visionary founding fathers, put to the vote again, and then embraced by an enthusiastic people. Carl Dean is the legacy of that original vote 50 years ago. He asked George Cate, our first vice mayor, Thelma Harper, our distinguished state senator, and me, if we would co-chair a series of events during this celebration, and we've agreed to do it, and we have enjoyed, I think, every meeting, every moment. And with that in mind, what could be more fitting than to ask Carl Dean, our mayor, to come forward and welcome us tonight. Carl?
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, John, for hosting these events, and thank you to Senator Harper and to George for serving as co-chairs. And I want to thank you all for being here. As I was out at the reception, I saw many council members, judges, state representatives, state senators, a whole slew of people, and so I thought it'd just be easier to ask anybody who's important just to remain seated, and you all be recognized. But I did want to take a moment just to actually mention three people. First, I think it's very fitting, since we're talking about Mayor Fulton tonight and mayors, to recognize Bill Purcell, my direct predecessor. Bill, thank you for being here. I'd also like to recognize Brenda Wynn, because she is the newest elected official in Davidson County. And you know, if you show up for work for the second week, you got to be recognized. That's my philosophy. And then I also want to just take a moment to say that it's really great to see my friend and your friend, Pat Nolan. Pat, thank you for doing that. You know, as mayor, I've had the privilege of building on the achievements of past mayors, Mayor Briley, Mayor Fulton, Mayor Boner, Mayor Bredesen, and Mayor Purcell. And I'm thankful for this opportunity. And I know this evening we're honoring Mayor Fulton, and I think I can say Mayor Fulton is just a great guy. And I want to say to you, Mayor Fulton, thank you for all you've done for the city. And one of the great things about being mayor is you can say thank you on behalf of all the citizens in Nashville for what you've done. I want to thank you for your vision. I want to thank you for your boldness. And, you know, when I look back, you know, one of the minor debates we had in my first term regarding that big building behind Bridgestone, the new convention center, when I think back on that, and we were going through that, I talked a lot about Mayor Fulton, because his sense of confidence in the city When Mayor Fulton went ahead and built a convention center in the early 1980s, Lower Broadway was not the entertainment corridor it is today that attracts. It was an entertainment corridor of sorts, and of course I was public defender at some point, so I knew a lot about it, but it was a different sort of entertainment corridor, and it was, and the city was not all that it is today. And that was a big move. And the work he did on the riverfront, the work he did on 2nd Avenue. We owe a lot to this man. We have a great panel that the Metro at 50 committee has put together, and I don't want to prolong this. I want to get to the panel. I'm so glad to have the charter council members here, George Cate, Jim Tuck, Richard Jenkins, to tell us how the new government worked during its first weeks and months. Betty Nixon is a former council member and the perfect person to ask all the right, tough questions. And Melvin Black started teaching at the old Pearl High School the year that the two governments consolidated, and he can shed some light on the school system and where our city was back then. This is going to be a great discussion. I'm glad you're all here, and on with the show. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. I think last time we met in this room, we paid tribute to Beverly Browley, who was the founding mayor of this joined government. We reviewed how it came to be and the role Mayor Browley played in those first early years, how tough it was for him to put together a government. The election to bring about Metro had been contested. It had been contested with the people twice before it passed. It was then contested again and again in court and survived those challenges. And then we came into the actual operation of it, and Beverly Browley as mayor and George Cate as vice mayor gave us the leadership we needed to put a foundation together that made it possible to build after all these years. And tonight we will honor Dick Fulton, our second mayor. When Carl asked us to serve, he also suggested to Thelma and George and me that we put together a committee of leaders who had expertise in various fields to guide us. And I don't want to go through the business of designating each of them tonight. I'll save that for later. But I would say that on that hot, blistering hot day in front of City Hall, we all enjoyed the day and we all suffered some. But we went home that day sad because one of our committee chairs had collapsed that day. And Carl's already mentioned Pat Nolan, but I'd just like to tell you how lucky we are to have you back and how much we appreciate it. And ask you to stand and take a little bow. And having said that, I want to express appreciation to Charlie Cardwell and the Friends of Dick Fulton for the reception. We all had a First Amendment right to a free drink earlier tonight because of Charlie Cardwell, and so let's give Charlie a great round of applause and a great vote of thanks. You know, so many of you are here because you have been, and so many still are, a part of this this government that we call Metro. And I'm going to say a few words about Dick Fulton, and then we're going to look at just a series of photographs that will take us all back to moments in his career. There are so many more moments you could remember. You know, Dick and I know, are, I'd like to say exactly the same age, but the truth of the matter is, while he's 85 and I'm 85, he was 85 on January 27th of this year, and I was 85 on July 27th of this year. So both of us are 85. He's 6 months older, but George Barrett is also 85, and he's older than both of us. And as Dick knows, George is older than both of us, even though he lies about it. And he was bellowing a lie right now. But I'm glad to see George here. Whatever my memories are of Dick, and you know, we were raised in this city. He in East Nashville, I in the West End. He served in the Navy. I served in the Air Force. My most vivid memory of Dick Fulton, I hate to say it, but he was absolutely sound asleep. And it was on election night, and he was running for Congress. And I was in the newsroom, and the votes came in box by box, precinct by precinct. And the vote count was close. Congressman Losa was a popular figure in this community. He had been a distinguished and effective district attorney. And the vote went one way, and then it went another way, and then we got down to it. And my recollection is that Dick, when the last vote was counted that night, was 29 votes ahead. But there was a problem. That afternoon, George Barrett had gone to the courthouse and had filed an injunction to bar the counting of absentee ballots in the second ward. And he based his petition for an enjoyment on an article that appeared in the Tennessean that indicated that there had been more absentee ballots voted in the second ward than in the entire county. And so George stopped the counting of those votes that night. And I remember walking into the office to tell Dick that he was ahead but was not yet known to be victorious. And I literally had to wake him up to tell him. And he took it as if he had known it was going to happen all along. Well, good night, thanks very much. And he went home, and then we went through a period the next week in which those absentee ballots were counted. The councilman from Second Ward, Gene Jacobs, told one of our reporters there that night, "Mr. Kovich, there ain't 5 votes in there for Fulton." In 3 precincts, there were just about 5 votes for Fulton. And so when those absentee ballots were counted, Dick, who had been a victor election night, now was a loser. And Congressman Loser then said there may have been tainted ballots there, and so I challenged my young friend to contest me in the election. My recollection is that Dick won that general election by something over 60,000 votes, which was a remarkable victory and a great tribute, a recognition of his candor, which characterized his life in politics from the first day until the last. I think back beyond that night to many times he voted with character, courage, commitment to causes that were right. I remember how controversial it was for him that first election to commit himself to health care as a right, to the whole issue of Medicare, It wasn't easy, and he was criticized. He was condemned for it, but he stood his ground. You know, in 1964, he was there. President Johnson proposed civil rights legislation, and when the votes were counted, there were 3 Southern congressmen who voted for the Civil Rights Bill, and one of them was Dick Fulton. And that took courage, and that vote was controversial, and that vote during the next 4 elections created major opposition for him. But his character and his commitment to justice prevailed, and again and again and again and again 4 times he was reelected. And then in 1987 we were so lucky to have him decide to come home and provide leadership. He succeeded Beverly Briley as the 2nd mayor of Metropolitan Nashville and Davidson County. You know, you look back on that time, and I think of how, as fine a leader as Mayor Briley was, Dick Fulton brought to this government the diversity which characterized the total community. He brought to this community an understanding that no city can be a great city without a total commitment to the downtown area, that great cities are built around great downtown areas, and with that he began to lay the foundation on which Carl Dean leads us today in a new direction, new vistas, new progress, new prosperity. So Dick, for all you've done to make this a better district and a better community, for all your commitment, for all your courage, for all that you've meant, and that Sandra has meant, to the life of Metropolitan Government, to the life of people who are here and far beyond who can't hear my voice. For all of that, I express to you my deepest thanks on behalf of everyone here, and on behalf of people far beyond the sound of my voice. And I'll ask you to come forward now and let us just give you a round of applause and a standing ovation for all that you've meant to all of us. Now, while you're standing here, behind us there is a review of your life in photographs, and I have a disc here that's a PowerPoint of images, and you can plug it in the computer anytime you want to find out what you used to look like, and it's right behind you, right there. Dick, thanks so much for everything, and thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
First, I'd like to thank John and Eamon Evans at the Nashville Tennessean for having it made possible for me to be successful in politics for many, many years. They went out of their way to give me an endorsement when I started, and fortunately, they kept on doing it. I want to thank you again. Thank Eamon for all that you did, and I want to thank each one here that played a role in my candidacy for office, for other things too. But it really has been a pleasure for me to be able to say that I've served Nashville as member of Congress, as the mayor, and many of you probably don't remember this, but I was also in the state senate at one time.
Some of us do remember it. I tried to forget it tonight, but
I know, and that's a cue for me to sit down and shut up. But thank you so much, and I want to say this about our present mayor. Carl Dane, you're doing one heck of a good job, and I'm very proud to say that you're the mayor of Nashville, Tennessee.
Thanks, Dick. Now, those of you who were here a month ago will recall that we concluded the presentation I made reflecting the cartoons in the Nashville Banner and the Tennessean, that it was really sort of a depiction of how tough and heated and hostile that campaign was. And the panel discussion that followed it was, for those of you who were here, I think, enlightening, illuminating, gave us a chance to look back and remember where we came from. And tonight we're going to do it again. And to moderate this month's panel, and we'll do it again next month, it's quite appropriate. I read Betty Nixon's bio, and it began by saying that Betty Nixon had a 50-year career in politics, government, community service, and civic activities. And I didn't know how lucky we were, Betty. You must have been a mere child when you started, but quite clearly that career 50 years ago started as Metropolitan Government began, and who could be better to lead this discussion? Former member of the Metropolitan Council for a dozen years, someone who has been a leader, women's rights, minority rights, human rights, someone who has contributed to the political life of the community in so many diverse ways, someone who stands solidly on grounds that are themselves, as I said so earlier about Dick Fulton, in the face of controversy, you've taken positions that have not always been popular, but long-term have prevailed. And so with that, Betty, I'm going to ask you to introduce this panel and lead us through the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mayor Fulton. I had the pleasure of serving the same 12 years you did, and you were a great leader for us. I'm going to quickly remind you of who our panelists are, and you have a little biographical information. George Cate was the first vice mayor, and he's a graduate of Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt Law School, and distinguished alumni, but I think really the repository of more knowledge about what Metro was, how it got started, and how it developed than maybe anyone else. So we're very fortunate to have George. Next to him is Melvin Black, who served on the council beginning in 1995, served 2 terms. At the time of the merger, he was a teacher at Pearl High School. So he has a lot of knowledge about how that first educational transition worked out. Dick Jenkins has served Nashville in several ways. He was a member of that first council, and then in 1967 was appointed juvenile judge in Nashville, where he served for quite some time. And my friend Jim Tuck, who was a member of that first council, and served actually until 75. A lawyer, a former assistant U.S. attorney, attorney for WSM, and attorney for the city of Belmead, which was in his district. I asked, we talked a little bit beforehand, and I'm telling you, this is going to be fun. And we are going to keep a pretty tight time limit on it. But I asked these guys beforehand if they had served in any other public office before Metro. And the answer is that none of them did, which I found interesting because I knew that there were some members who were. So I'd like to just start out by asking you if you were, and I'll ask all of you to respond to this, if you were a supporter, did you find the Metro idea exciting, and did you support it?
It really was. I was an enthusiastic supporter of it.
Do you think you would have run for office if it hadn't been for that change in the government?
I have no idea. I don't really know.
All right. And Judge Jenkins?
Well, of course, I had worked in the courthouse as a clerk for Chancellor Adams, and I was over there one day after Metro, and the friend of mine from Donaldson, who was an old politician out there, talked me into running for the council, and I took off from there. And of course, I had an interest in it because my brother had graciously taken me into his law firm, and I was practicing law in that firm with Carmack Cochran, who was chairman of the Charter Commission, both Charter Commissions really. So I had an insight on somewhat of the concept of Metro from that viewpoint.
Well, I could definitely say the answer is no. During this particular period, the black community, felt so adamant that the white community was stripping blacks of their political power inside the city limits, inside Nashville rather than Davidson County. That proved to be, at this time, a false impression. But back then, when we were trying to sell this idea, the idea was that you were going to take away all political powers from the black community inside the city.
In a hot July of 1954, I returned to Nashville after 2 years in the Army and went to a public meeting sponsored by the YMCA. And all I heard being talked about was the possibility of consolidation of Nashville and Davidson County governments. During my absence in 1953, the Tennessee's Constitution had been amended to permit a consolidation of city and county governments. And everything that was being talked about in those days was how significant it would be for the future of Nashville and Davidson County if consolidation could take place. My good friend, schoolmate from Vanderbilt Law School days, Charlie Warfield, recruited me and said, "George, I'm chairman of the Citizens for Better Government. I'm campaigning for Metropolitan Charter, and I want you to be the chairman of my speakers committee. I want you to recruit at least 25 people, get them committed to give 3 hours of their time for a training session, and then be willing to answer the question to go to civic clubs, radio, some television, PTA meetings, wherever there was discussion of Metro, and teach people what's in that charter." From that time forward, Charlie Warfield recruited me, and I could not say no, and from that time forward, I was a thorough supporter of Metropolitan Government.
Very good. Well, obviously, it worked. The city voted it in. And there you were, the first 40. And you as the vice mayor, and you had to make it happen. So, what'd you do?
Really, let me interject.
Okay.
I think really what sold it, though, was when the Ben West and the city annexed out Murfreesboro Road.
Yeah, that's right.
That was the second. Of course, the first charter vote failed.
Right.
And this, of course, this was the second one. But when he annexed that out Murfreesboro Road all the way to the airport from the city limits, and took those people in, and they didn't have a say-so about being brought into the government. I think that idea, and the Tennessean and the other news media jumped on that, and that helped sell the idea of Metro.
The fear of God.
the fear of Ben West, I guess, in the city.
Eddie, may I also add to the point I made was that not only was it the black community in the city, But you also had a segment of county individuals who were against consolidation because they also would lose some political power.
But everybody was worried about how it was going to
Right.
affect them.
That's true.
I'm sure that was
Nobody
true.
want to lose positions or jobs. Or,
So none of you guys were in elected office, so you were not in the same category as some of your colleagues.
well, these guys are way ahead of me.
Right. So, but then you had it, and so you had to make it work. You had a charter, but you didn't have rules. You didn't. So what'd you do, George? You want to
Betty,
start us off?
June the 28th of 1962 was the date of the referendum when the people of Nashville and Davidson County adopted the charter. October the 4th of 1962, the Tennessee Supreme Court said it's legal, it's constitutional, it was properly put together and properly adopted. November the 6th, the first election was held. A few people were elected without a runoff, but the majority of those who would serve in that council had to go through a period of a runoff election 3 weeks later, late in November. Now, what people don't fully realize, that group of council members, many of them were new to local government, but they were dedicated and they were committed. They were gradually getting to know each other. And I pay tribute to Dick Jenkins and Jim Tuck and to others who were in that first council, because from late November until we were sworn in the 1st of April of 1963, several months later, they met on a regular basis, not paid, not sworn in. They met in order to determine what it was they were going to do. They prepared the set of rules that they would adopt as soon as they were sworn in. They met each other and talked about who should serve on various committees. One thing after another took place during that period of several months.
Let me just interject that this was before the open meetings law was passed in Tennessee.
We weren't even officials at that time. We'd been sworn in. I mean, we had been elected, but we weren't sworn in
We
yet.
couldn't violate an open meeting law because we weren't elected.
That's true.
But anyway, so that when the time came and we were sworn in on the 1st of April, that next night, the 2nd of April, the first official meeting of the Metro Council was held. And we were ready to start confirming nominations by Mayor Briley of some of his principal people, such as the head of finance. And we were ready to adopt our own rules of procedure, have the committees appointed, and go to work. But and it's amazing what that first council, I pay tribute to my council members for what they did, because between April the 1st and June the 29th, the last Saturday in June, they went all the way through Mayor Briley's budget, debated it, argued about it, and finally adopted it on the last possible day, on Saturday, a special called meeting by the mayor, so that after just 3 months of that hard work, we had the first budget and tax rate for metropolitan government.
Now, that's quite an accomplishment. Now, Councilman Tuck, you were running out in the area where I lived, and so tell us a little bit about how you campaigned in those days.
Well, it was all about it. Many times, really, there's nothing spectacular about it, but you see about the big campaigns. They have meetings here, meetings there, and spend a lot of money on advertising and big billboards and media of all kind. And I'll never forget my only campaign tool for anybody to know about me, anything ever heard of me or anything else. I wrote out about a half a page stuff and had it a jillion of them mimeographed and took a bunch of them in my pocket, and I just walked my district from one end to the other, didn't meet a house, and hand them out if it came to the door, and if they didn't, well, I'd put one in the front door. And the interesting thing about that is that somebody called me one time and said, "You know, said I found your brochure in my door," but said, "We never use the front door. We park the car." And I thought, well, that's the way it is with everybody. So from then on, I left my brochure in the back door. And so when time came, I won. There it was. 3 terms.
So that was a great strategy. And George told us earlier that he appointed you to practically every committee, and it practically worked you to death. Now, Judge Jenkins, you had 18 opponents?
I had 18 opponents. So
Well,
it didn't take too many to get in the runoff. Get your kinfolks and a few other people, if you had enough. But I had pretty much the same thing as Jim. I had me a little card printed that had an outline of the district where people would know where they lived and where they would vote and everything, and a little bit about me. And it was just a door-to-door campaign of 2 or 3 people and some other good friends are working along. And I think I probably spent about $250, something like that, on the campaign. Which is
well, just a word about that council. There were 40 members, of course, and we were talking. There were 5 African Americans on that council, and one of you want to talk about them? They were pretty distinguished and well-known people.
Well, there's no doubt about the fact 3 of those 5 were elected without a runoff to show the leadership that they had in their own communities. That was Harold Love and Z. Alexander Luby and Bob Lillard, later Judge Lillard. Those 3 were elected November the 6th without even a runoff. 2 more, John Driver and Mansfield Douglas, were elected after a runoff 3 weeks later. But those 5 were the black leaders in that council. And let's face it, Z. Alexander Luby's name was well known, not just locally, but nationally in the civil rights movement.
Fact is, I'd say that Mr. Luby was internationally known, and by far the best known. He was better known than all the rest of the councilmen put together.
That's true. You're right.
Okay. So, and there was one woman.
One woman.
yeah.
Lady Frances
A member
Doyle.
of a family that had been in politics and judicial offices in Nashville, Frances Doyle.
Yeah.
Frances Doyle.
And if you look at the notices that went out to the council, they all started this way: Lady Doyle and gentlemen. She got the first recognition in every communication.
I'll never forget some controversial matter came before the council, and I know it was passed. Had a referendum to determine whether liquor with the drink could be allowed. Well, they hardly had counted the votes, and Frances called me. She represented the tough district way over in North Nashville, and I represented the Blue Stocking Bell Mead district. And Frances called and says, "Well, Jim," says your precinct and mine stood shoulder to shoulder on one issue. Sure enough, the 2 highest precincts in favor of the vote, whiskey with the drink, were mine and Frances Doyle.
Very good. Well, now you guys had some pretty big stuff to deal with, and then Councilman Black, you were a teacher, and one of the things that they had to deal with was how the 2 school systems were how schools were gonna work. So, do you have what are your thoughts about how that worked out?
Well, with the merger of both the city and county government, the school system became one school system, but it came at a period when the Supreme Court had issued the mandate that struck down the separate but equal clause with schools. And this city, under the metropolitan form of government, took the easiest approach that they could take without creating a big problem, which some of us disagree, and today we do agree with that, was a 1 year at a time integrating of schools first. But after the 6th year, they integrated all of the schools. And it worked out real well for the public schools of Davidson County. Now I know that the high schools became integrated in 1969.
And were you still at Pearl at that time?
I was still at Pearl then, and the within the high schools. And I know that I welcomed my very first students into my classrooms, and one was Piccarilli and the other one was Wiedemeyer. And I remember those names. Ms. Wiedemeyer has since, she's a med student, and she has since died, but Piccarilli was part of the Free Will Baptist congregation, and an outstanding student too.
So, and then you had police and the sheriff to get together. Was that difficult? Was that?
Well, it's probably more difficult for them than it was for us. Because I mean, you know, the sheriff was giving up a lot of power there, the law enforcement end of it, and of course the part of the sheriff's department was being carried over into the Nashville City Police, and of course I'm sure there was a lot of infighting there, but I don't know that we heard too much about that. You know, we adopted a budget and sent it over, and they worked with that.
So all of you very diverse people, you said you met a lot. How did you get to know one another? How did you get to trust? I know you fought with the mayor some. There's some famous words that he had for the council. But
just like anything else, you know, that was our job, to know each other, to learn, learn each other's.
It was remarkable, a credit to me, that when the council decided on its rules of procedure, they decided to give to the vice mayor the power to name committees and committee chairmen. And that has continued through the years since that time. Now, that was a compliment to me, but it was a big undertaking. So one of the first jobs I had was to get to know the members of the council, see what committees they would like to serve on, which ones would like to be committee chairman.
You'd give us a look, we'd send you on a slip about.
That's right. They'd give me a list of possible committee assignments. Jim Tuck was not named the chairman, but he put on 4 committees, including budget and finance and planning. Hey, the biggest, toughest committees, I put Jim Tuck on. You know, and Dick Jenkins, before the first council was over, was selected by his fellow council members as the president pro tem. So at any time that I wasn't present, he presided over the meetings.
Yeah, and when you resigned,
that's
you
right.
handed me the gavel.
That's right. I turned it over to him.
Yeah, what'd I do with this?
So, well, one of the big issues, and still a major responsibility of the council, has to do with land use planning and zoning.
That's correct.
And so, was there a planning document when you started, or was the comprehensive zoning ordinance, did it come along in your...
One of the first confirmations we had to give were the mayor's appointments to the planning commission. And that was extremely important. And the relationship between the planning commission and the council was always a matter of some tension. There were a few of our council members, and Tandy Wilson was one of them. I wish Tandy was here to say it tonight. But Tandy, when he was elected without a runoff, he said, my rule is if there's a proposed zoning change in my district, I will not try to upset whatever the planning commission does. If the planning commission says they favor it, I'll be for it. If they say they're against it, I'll be against it. That was his rule from then on. He avoided a lot of trouble as a result of that with his constituents, but it was a flat rule. So our relationship with other organizations was very important.
Well, there was a lot of controversy about councilmanic courtesy.
Yes, that's
as
true.
well. So now, Councilman Tuck, we talked about this a little bit.
I have very bitter feelings about that. I feel like that it was abused from A to Z. I really do. And the illustration I want to give is it really was this way. You would submit an issue to a committee where everybody on the committee was thoroughly competent, and the committee would study it from A to Z, and they'd vote, and they would report back to the whole council, being in favor of the committee. Some councilman who had said nothing along the line, anything, could stand up back there in the back of the room, and he'd say, well, members of the council, that's in my district, and I appreciate if you'll vote against it. And maybe I and one or two more would follow the committee, and everybody else would vote with the councilman. Well, there's a lot to be said for agreeing with the councilman. He knows his district better than anybody else, but I had some trouble with that.
So you were sort of independent.
Yeah.
And how many of you were?
Betty, may I say the most explosive issue for a council member is planning and zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can either make you or break you, and I'm a testimony to that. And a good friend of mine, one of the former mayors, is here tonight, and he and I had to tackle an issue on, and it became real explosive.
I'll agree with that, with one exception. I served on a committee that investigated putting PVC pipe in lieu of the old cast iron pipe. And you talk about getting the wrath of plumbers. I caught the wrath of plumbers. But now a plumber will tell you that's the greatest invention that's ever come about, is the PVC pipe. But back then, just snapping two pieces of pipe together wasn't the plumber's idea of working.
You know, there was a difference between councilmanic courtesy and councilmanic control. Councilmanic courtesy, in the rule of the council, said normally a councilman at large may introduce a zoning change only after giving the district councilman an opportunity to join with him, to sponsor it. And only if that is turned down will he put it in effect. There was a courtesy that said if there's an issue of zoning in a particular councilman's district, we would try to get him involved, or her involved in one case, get him or her involved, because they should know best what's going on in their district. But that's councilmanic courtesy. The control element that was tough was this. If they said, we're not going to introduce anything unless the district council introduces it. So if you're a property owner and you want a zoning change, and you go to your district councilman and he won't introduce it, you can't get it on the floor of the council. That's councilmanic control, not councilmanic courtesy. And that's where it becomes difficult.
Well, let me just do a couple more things, and we'd like to take a couple questions from the audience. I think it's important to note that all this happened in the midst of the civil rights movement.
True.
And although the next program next month is going to focus on those issues, I just think from your perspective, how did race relations affect your relationships with other council members and your policy considerations?
Well, I'm proud to say that in my view, race made absolutely no difference with the members of that council. Absolutely none. Yeah. We'd had our personal alliances, or you had our political alliances, or whatever, but race never made. And I think that was true, council-wide, that we all worked together as one.
Betty, I give credit to Mayor Briley, to some of the business community, and some of our outstanding black leaders. Because I remember very well during that first administration, very few Saturdays passed but what the mayor had us meeting with him in the mayor's office to talk about problems involving public accommodations. We hadn't really gotten into the major issues about education at that stage, but public accommodations, yes. And the fortunate thing is we had leaders in the council, and I'm looking at two of them right there that worked with me. And we had black leaders in the council who wanted to work these things through and not have a confrontation. There was a spirit of goodwill that was hard to overcome, and I agree with Jim. We got along well, but it took some doing. It was not easy because in the community, tensions were very high.
Well, let me just, my final question really is going to be about, now we've had from 1963 to 2012, and you had some vision, obviously, maybe not fully formed when you came in. And so how do you think it's worked out? And one of the things I'm curious about, I know that first zoning ordinance, they didn't allow anybody to live in the central core. There was no residential use. So now we've got a city bursting with urbanism, if you will. How do you feel about how it's worked out, and what surprised you or pleased you in all that time?
I'll yield to the others, and I'll have one comment to make.
I don't know that I'm really surprised. I think the concept in itself has proven, that you look, you watch the media, read the print, Memphis, for instance. I think this year they had a battle down there about their schools or their budgets down there. You got the city and the county battling the school budgets. Sumner County here, they battle their school budgets, and it opened up the door for business. Of course, liquor by the drink come in, and that was a big boost for this community, contrary to what some people thought it would happen. So I'm tremendously pleased with the concept and what's happened, and unfortunately, I think other cities losing the bet by not taking the same road.
So, did you become a convert, Councilman Black?
Well, you heard me say that's absolutely no. But after these years have passed, I've truly accepted the fact that Metropolitan Government has been one of the best things that could happen to this city.
I strongly concur in that, and I'd say, except for what has happened in the last 50 years, there'd be no reason for us to celebrate a birthday today.
So how about you, Councilman Tucker? Are you pleased with how it's turned out?
Oh yes. I say every once in a while you wonder, well, how is it that this is the only place that's ever adopted?
Yeah, but it's certainly been a unique...
You think really that somebody else will try it out, but nobody else has tried it out.
I think that's true in Tennessee still, is it not? Is that right, Mayor? Okay.
Betty, you have emphasized the fact that there were many of us that were new. We were new to government, to elected positions, but we got to know each other well, and we worked together well. And we were very fortunate in that regard. Some of us, to prove how inexperienced we were, about 2 weeks after the election and we had taken office, I had a call from the mayor's office saying, we have a distinguished visitor from out of town. He's out at the airport. Mayor Briley is tied up, and Vice Mayor Kate, we need you to go out and present the key to the city. So they brought to my office this huge, big metal key. And I went to the airport, and I presented the key to the city. And the gentleman left with it on the airplane. And then they called me and said, where is the key? I said, you told me to give you the key to the city, and I did. They said, you were supposed to put a little something on the lapel, and that goes back and goes on the wall. So I gave away the key to the city.
Who'd you give it to? Do you remember? All right. Let's open it up and see if anyone in the audience has a question they'd like or a comment they'd like to make. We have it.
Mr. Siegenthaler, in introducing the program, said something about Metro government being either emulated or copied or something across the United States. Would you gentlemen know of any other cities that have adopted this system of government?
I think this is the only one. I may be wrong about that.
Because Mr. Siegenthaler said...
I think Tim Gordon did some research or had some research done.
Louisville.
Right, and nationwide, I believe she found...
See, the gentleman here says Louisville and Jefferson County.
Jacksonville, Florida.
Well, they have not quite as complete, but so there are variations of it, but it's not, I think it's true to say it's not widespread.
Dade County, I think, Miami, but none have adopted the true concept that we have. Yeah. They still I think like in Dade County, I think they still have a separate law enforcement system.
Well, the next question that follows that is why? I mean, is there what difficulties are there that can't be surmounted when a city and a county unite in metropolitan government?
Let's turn that around. Why did ours not pass the first time? What happened to make it pass the second time? And you know, and other cities, Louisville and Jefferson County, they just did it a few years ago. It took 3 votes. It failed twice up there before it was passed the third time. And they have a lot more satellite cities than we do have. The more you let the community be fragmented, the more difficult the job becomes to consolidate.
You give up political power.
That's right.
One reason why it was easier here, it's a small county, it's a state government, it's statewide is here, and you don't really have sections of different interests around the county. It's one, in fact, so what made it, so we made it such an all.
We were speculating actually yesterday, I think it was Tevin, about whether or not it would pass here today if we had not done it in the 60s.
Well, Old Hickory just joined in.
I do.
Lakewood, yeah.
I do think there was a moment in time that the people the leaders in Nashville had the vision to take advantage of that might not have come again soon had they not done it then.
Before those of us that campaigned for it get overconfident, let me remind you, when it passed in 1962, it passed in the city by about 57% and in the county about 56%. It was a battle to the end.
Other questions? David?
Yes, we've been here tonight to honor, of course, our great mayor, Richard Fulton, and I have a question related to metropolitan government and our mayors. Of course, before metropolitan government, we had mayors like Hillary House, Tom Cummings, Ben West. How has metropolitan government affected how mayors run this city? And if we didn't have that form of government, how would our city be run, and how would the competing counties affect what we are doing here today?
Let's see, how much time do we have? Let me take a swipe. Well, I don't know. One of y'all want to take a swipe at that? I do think we consider to have a strong mayor form of government. And I don't know what that was like before because I'm not as old as they are. What do you think?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Well, it's just if we hadn't had, how did the forming of a metropolitan government change the role of the mayor? And if we hadn't had metropolitan government, how would we be different? I think, is that right? Yes. He's nodding his head.
George,
hey, I'm one that, of course, I was a strong advocate.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have a strong point of view. But it's my belief is that what has happened in Nashville, the structure is part of it.
Yeah.
The people are the other part. Yes. We have had good leadership, mayors, vice mayors, council members, department heads, people who worked on the planning commission, and the business community. Nashville and Davidson County have been remarkably supportive, not unanimously, but remarkably supportive of this metropolitan government. And I think that we owe a great debt of gratitude to the 10 people on that charter commission that wrote that charter, and the first council that got it going and approved the appointees of the mayor, and those who've served through the years since that time. I just think it's been tremendously beneficial.
Of course, I'm supposed to be the moderator and not say anything, but those of you who know me well enough, but I do think that one thing we sometimes miss in Nashville is that we have Meharry and Tennessee State and Fisk, and we have 100-and-something-year-old tradition of a black middle class that is educated and professional, and it's an asset that few cities have in as great a depth as we do, and I think that made a lot of this possible. So that's just my perspective. Question there?
They talked about the vote about metropolitan. What about the? Excuse me. The blue laws. When were the blue laws repealed, and how did it go over in Metro Nashville?
I don't know. I think that was a state issue.
It was closed on Sunday for businesses.
Val, do you know?
Well, Betty, I was 50 years with the Internal Revenue, so
Right.
I take credit for making Nashville whiskey by the drink. That's when it really took off. But I don't want to take too much credit tonight. I'll give you in great detail later after all the raids on Printers Alley that occurred, and that's right. But I don't want to emphasize this. I want to agree with George that this form of government is really great. But what really makes it work is the nonpartisan provision of the charter, and the way these businessmen and well-made councilmen like Jim Tuck and the North Nashville, everybody works together for the benefit of Nashville. So I think we can send a message to the whole world, and especially the United States, as to how much we could accomplish if nobody worried about who gets credit for it. And I think this is the lesson that we should present to the world. Thank you.
Okay. Let's have one more question, and then we'll get Mr. Siegenthaler to close us in.
Thank you very much. Being a Nashville native and not old enough to remember in 1962, I mean, I was young and couldn't remember that occurred. And I'm thinking, my gosh, how intelligent and smart we were to make this happen, because I look at this and think, this is phenomenal, but we're this way. But I want to ask, when it happened in 1962, how long did it take for people to accept it?
I think the acceptance came fairly early. And I think it came primarily because of the diligence of these people who ran in the councilmanic districts. They ran, they were excited, they were trying to help, they were trying to serve their community. And I think the quality of their service was a major factor in making people feel that it was good.
So how long did it take African Americans?
Based on the first election, I would say that the diversity created this atmosphere of wanting to be a part of, with having out of the 45 African Americans that were there. I want to raise another issue too. You asked, but every council session, or not session, but tenure or term, there's always this debate now as to whether or not the original charter that created 40 members is something that's too large for this city. And it's always a debatable issue during each term. So that's something that may come up.
And that number was created to accommodate the old city council and the old county court, as I recall. Did you want to make a comment?
I just think, I was thinking that before that Mr. Black brought it up, that I think that the large number of councilmanic districts has made the community closer to the government because of the access to that one councilman in that district. You go back and you say you go have 7 councilmen. How do you call 7 councilmen? You don't. If you got the 35 plus the 5 at large, I think you've got a government that's out there in the community more so downtown. It's there, it's touchable, it's someone you can talk to, and I think people can feel part of the government that way.
This is a good point. All right, we're gonna, Joe?
This is tonight in large part to honor Mayor Fulton, and we have often heard about his support of the Civil Rights Act when he was a member of the Congress, but what is not usually spoken of is that when he became mayor of Metropolitan Government in Nashville, Tennessee, he made a concerted effort to include women in his administration, and so far as I am aware, he holds the record. He certainly held it at that time for the appointment of women in positions of management in his administration, and I want to recognize him for that. Thank you, Dick.
Let me add a footnote to that. It's important for you to get to know who your friends are. Now, in 1976, Dick Fulton had been mayor for a year. It was the bicentennial year. I hadn't been involved in politics in quite some time. And I had a telephone call at the office saying, Mayor Fulton wants to see you. So I went to his office. He said, George, you've loafed long enough. I need you to serve on the Board of Education. And I'm getting ready to appoint you. We still had an appointed board at that time. And he did. And I served and enjoyed the 6 years. It was tough. It was not an easy time. But what I say is make friends carefully, because they'll get you saddled with a job if you aren't careful.
All right. Well, I think.
Just respond to George King.
Yeah, absolutely.
This man defeated me for president student body at East High School.
Well, let's thank our panelists, and then I'll turn it back over to John. Somebody's burning out there. Okay. What?
Since you mentioned, hi, I'm Zana Belberry, and I don't believe I've known Senator Mayor Fulton for 40 years. I was in my early 20s when I came, and Mayor Fulton in '76 said, I want to go sponsor the International Festival. We had one there. And I have to thank him for making Nashville diverse. William Hutchins there worked, with us. And in '76 we did the joint International Festival. And I worked proudly with the mayor, with other communities as they came, people who were refugees from war zones, and Nashville became a resettlement program city, thanks to Mayor Fulton. And all these people started working, raising good kids, having, businesses. So our city is more than just Metro government for us. It has expanded. He expanded it to the whole world. And I'm forever grateful for him and for his leadership in our international.
I think we could do testimonials to Mayor Fulton.
Very good. Well, Dick, clearly you know the affection. What you hear in this room is what you hear all over this community. Thank you all for coming. Carl, once again, thanks for helping us celebrate this unique form of government. Next month, same day of the month, you'll all hear about it, and you'll get notices about it. I hope you'll all come back. At that time, we will honor another mayor. We'll have another panel. We will explore next time the issue that we touched on tonight, what it meant for the total community, and particularly what it meant to the African American community to have this government merged, and how many people made tremendous sacrifice for what they thought was going to be, and has indeed turned out to be, the betterment of a total community. So thank you all for coming. Come back again, please. Thanks again to Charlie Cardwell for that First Amendment right to a free drink. Dick Fulton, thanks for coming. We love you. We're adjourned.